we get into lighting and, we need to understand what PBR is. Um, PBR stands for physics-based rendering, and it is a method of shading and rendering that provides a more accurate representation of how light interacts with surfaces. And PBS stands for, obviously, it's a shading technique. It's physics-based shading. So a PBR shader uses ambient occlusion, normal, and possibly height map for parallax or displacement mapping. And in PBR, we have the diffuse, which is nothing but the color that's going to be reflected off. And we also have a metallic mask, which is your specular balance. And we also have roughness. We have metallic, and then we have diffuse, we have your ambient occlusion, your normal, and your height. So we have all of those things. And if you go into Substance Designer, you can kind of see all of this in play. But the thing we need to know about PBR is that you can never create a situation where the diffuse and specular combine and reflect more light than is initially received. That's saying that PBR, holds up true to the law of conservation. And that's the most important thing. So we know that engines are, true to physics. They are making sure the law of conservation is constantly happening. That's what PBR is. Yeah. Fresnel effect. The Fresnel effect is the amount of light reflected from a surface depends on the viewing angle of which it is perceived. So in Unreal Engine, Fresnel is like your specular value, and F0 is the Fresnel reflection at 0 degrees. When light hits a surface at a particular angle, percentage of the light that is reflected back is specular. So F0 for dielectrics is 0.02 to 0.05. And for conductors, it's usually 0.5 to 1.0. And the F0 for common dielectric materials is typically set to 0.04, linear or 4% reflective. In the metal roughness flow, this value is hard-coded in the shader. So if you go into like Substance Designer and stuff, it's always set as 0.04. And Unreal Engine, it is known as the specular value. And in Unreal Engine, like if you're ever changing any material values, it's better to change the metallic value and the roughness, but keep the specular the same. Don't change it at all because it'll give lighting values that you don't expect. And the next thing you need to know is base color and diffuse. So the thing you need to keep in mind is anytime you're making materials, never go below 30 to 50 sRGB if it's a dark value. So if you're making it black, it should never be completely black. Because what is complete black? Complete black means there's no reflection. It's just going to absorb all the light in. Because if you shine a light to a black object, none of the light gets reflected out. So that's what's going to happen in your engine. If you make it black, you're never going to have any light reflecting out. And if you have a bright value, don't go above 240 sRGB because same thing. If it's too bright, it's just going to, blow up on your screen. It's going to be too bright technically. And white bounces everything. So if you have a completely white value, all the light is going to be reflected back and it's going to be too bright on your screen. So keynote for base colors and diffuse textures or whatever, you should never be too black or too white. You have to keep that in mind when you make materials. Otherwise, your lighting is going to get messed up. And there are instances where some artists, make something that's completely black. And if your lighting doesn't look nice, it's mostly because they've used black or they've used colors that, or something in the texture is wrong. So you need to make sure that the textures are right and then only your lighting will be right. Otherwise, if the textures are wrong and you try to fix your lighting, it'll never happen because lighting depends on the textures, and on the a physically based rendering is based on your textures. So you have to make sure the base color and diffuse follow these guidelines. And for metals, the most important thing is try to keep your metals within this range. Don't go too dark. Aluminum, it's almost white. It's 245, 246, 246. So you have to, these are like the sRGB values that you should keep in mind when you're making metals, because this is what gives the color. Never make it dark, because if the metal is too dark, it's not going to reflect properly and it'll just look like a black, object that doesn't reflect anything. So you need to keep in mind of these things. What are light maps? The next most important thing when you're building anything in Unreal. So light maps is a data structure used in light mapping, a form of surface catching in which brightness of a surface in virtual scene is pre-calculated and stored in texture maps for later use. So what does Unreal do? When you bake something, it creates light maps and it stores this. So when you play the game, it puts all of them onto the scene and it's all cached and it's baked, and nothing is real time when you're using light maps. So what are, in Unreal you have static lights, stationary, and movable. So the difference between all of these is kind of, you can put it together in this table, but this table is very vague and you'll only understand it once you start using the engine more and making more scenes and lighting. So over here I've written actor, light, direct diffuse, indirect diffuse, and shadows. And so if the actor is stationary and the light is stationary, you get a direct diffuse, which is real time. So what is a direct diffuse again? So a direct diffuse is nothing but when light hits a surface, it bounces off multiple times. So the light that bounces off and hits other surfaces and brightens the scene is it's called diffuse light. Specular light is the direct light that hits a surface and then comes back and it's seen according to your eye. Like when you move your eye, that's the specular. So the direct diffuse is the light that directly comes out from that point. And indirect diffuse is the light that bounces off and lights the surface. So our direct diffuse is going to be real time if it's a stationary actor and a stationary light. The indirect diffuse is going to use volume samples, which I'll explain once we're in engine. And shadows are going to be real time. Now, stationary actor, static light, the direct diffuse is going to be volume samples. So it's going to be calculated. And indirect diffuse is volume samples, and we're not going to have any shadows. So if you move a stationary object with a static light, there won't be any shadows happening from that static light. So if we have an actor which is stationary and a light which is movable, we're going to have real-time direct diffuse. We will not be having any indirect diffuse, and our shadows are going to be real-time. And if we have an actor that's static, a light stationary, we're going to have a direct diffuse that's baked in, an indirect diffuse that's baked, and shadows are going to be real-time. If we have an actor that's static, light that's static, we're going to have a baked direct diffuse, a baked indirect diffuse, and baked shadows. So if you move this object, or if you move the light, you can't move the object as static. So if you move the light anytime if you want it, it's just going to be, it's just going to be the same shadows. It doesn't matter if you move the light. Unless you bake it again, nothing's going to change. Then you have static, movable, static actor, movable light. So it's going to have real time. You will not have any indirect diffuse, and you will have real time shadows. If you have a movable actor, a stationary light, you'll have real time direct diffuse, volume samples for your indirect diffuse, and you're going to have shadows real time. Then you have an actor that's movable, a light that's static, and you're going to have volume samples for direct diffuse, indirect diffuse, volume samples, and shadows, none. And if you have your actor as movable, light movable, you're going to have real-time direct diffuse. Indirect diffuse is volume samples, and shadows are real-time. So this kind of just gives you a basic understanding of what's going to happen in engine, but once we actually get in, I can explain it more. Next. So what were those volume samples I was talking about? So volume samples are nothing but these volume spheres, which are scattered around the, like, around our area, and they store pre-computed lighting in all points of space. So it's basically stores pre-computed lighting in all points in space, called the volumetric light map, at build time, and then uses it for interpolation at runtime for indirect lighting of dynamic objects. So what these spheres do is, so if you have a light randomly in the sky and it, shines light this way, the sphere calculates at which point the light is hitting these spheres. And if you have a stationary object, so based on how the lighting is happening on these spheres, that object will have lighting on itself. So it'll go to the nearest sphere, see how that sphere is shaded, and it'll calculate the shading for itself. You can't see these spheres in Engine unless you go to the view modes, but it's hidden. It's all hidden, and it uses it's more for, what do you call it? It's stationary lights usually create this. Whatever light it's baked in, it kind of bakes in. So you have to bake your lighting to get the correct volumetric light maps to have the correct lighting on them. And once that's done, all your stationary, objects, so like this one, actor, uses volume samples. This uses volume samples. So all of this is calculated based on those spheres. And so this is what I have to explain for now, and then I'll just go into Unreal Engine. Let's close that. Let's open this. Go to just 1 minute. Let me open a blank level. Blank. I literally call the level blank. Okay, so let me go to, okay, so now I have a blank level. There's nothing in my level. It's completely empty. Let's see what happens when I start throwing in lights in there. So first I'm gonna throw in a plane, just a normal plane. You can't see it because it's completely black, right? There's no light happening. Everything's black. So what I want to do is I want to go in here. I'm going to type sky atmosphere. Throw that in there. Still can't see anything. That's because I don't have my directional light. Once my directional light is in there, wow, now you can see the plane. And for directional light, we want to go down. We have to turn one thing on before we can do anything. We have to say atmosphere sunlight. Once we click that, look, we have the sky, and this tied up with the sky atmosphere is causing the lighting. Another thing we need is our skylight. This is our most important thing too. What does a skylight do? It takes a cube map of the world and reflects it. That's what a skylight does. Just takes a cube map of the whole scene and reflects it. So that's what you need to know about a sky map. That's why we have it in there. Usually you want your skylight to be static because it calculates inside a closed area, and it's never really it just will cost more on the GPU too. Let's go with that. Okay, now we have this and we have this, so keep it stationary because I want shadows that are, if an object moves, I want shadows to happen. That's why I'm going to keep it stationary. Say that. And our sky atmosphere. So one thing I want to show, if I go into my skylight and I say real time, I can't do real time capture unless it's stationary. So if you want to do that, you have to keep it stationary. And real time capture, basically, if I wait a minute. If I go to my sky atmosphere, skylight, directional light. Did I select this? Cast shadows on clouds. So if I move my sky atmosphere, you should see how my stuff changes. That's what's happening. And if I see my sun, yep, that's kind of how, you know, you can have your sky atmosphere changing. With this, if I go ahead and keep this static, I can't have real-time capture of my skylight. Oh, sorry, wrong thing. It'll still change, but you'd have to bake your light every time you change it. So that's there. And let's go with a cube. Oh no. Boop, boop. You can see how, let's expand this and expand this. Cool. So you can see how the shadow is happening from there. Cool. Now we have another one. And let's change the mobility of this. Keep it stationary. And we have our directional light. If we keep our directional light static, we build it. Let's build a light. So we'll have to wait. It's gonna take some time to build. After it's built. So as you can see over here, our lights were static. And what we got, because our cube was static, we got a baked shadow. But since this was stationary, we didn't get any shadow. Why is that? So a static light, let's go back to our little slide over here and go back. So we had an actor that was stationary and a light that was static, and it uses volume samples. But what happened was we didn't put any volume samples into our level. So I go back into Unreal, and to add volume samples into your level, you're going to use something called light mass importance volume. And we're going to, you know, stretch it out so it covers our scene. Guess that's good. Our sky atmosphere is movable. We can set this to stationary. Let's build now. If we move it around, it still doesn't get updated because this is, you know, the directional light is not gonna give it a shadow. Let's make this stationary now. Now you can see there's a shadow happening, and it's a real-time shadow. If we go back to our, you know, let's come over here. So light stationary, actor stationary, direct diffuse stationary, volume samples, and real time. But if you look stationary, static, volume samples, indirect diffuse, but then our shadows, none. We only have ambient occlusion. So you can see that right now. And let me go back. So now we have real-time shadows. This was baked in. This is a real-time shadow. And I'll show you a way to actually see volume samples. So you're going to want to press tilde, say r dot. Actually, no, you're just going to type volumetric light maps. So you want to go to show flag, visualize, and you're going to type in 1. Yeah, so you're going to type in 1. And after you typed in 1, you can see that all these spheres popped up right where I put my box. And you can also change how dense it is by going to world settings, going to light mass settings, and you can go down over here. And the detail cell size, you can increase this value. It increases the computational time, but you'll have more light maps. And also lighting method, you can say volumetric light map over here. You have minimum brick, you can increase this. Oops, I do not want to increase it right now. And when you're doing lighting, you want to make sure the light map settings are set. And so the number of indirect lighting bounces, 10, it'll give you really amazing realistic lighting, but it increases your build time. So if you are just testing out your lighting, keep it at a lower value. Keep it at 4, keep it at 4 or 5. Once you have the final look, increase it to 10 and then build and set it to production. So if you're building your lighting quality, put it to production, set all these value high and build it. But if you're, constantly building, you want to build it at preview, set these values low and just build it quickly. So once you have an idea of how you want your lighting to look, then you put it into production and you build everything. So your indirect lighting quality, it's always going to be a multiple of this. So if your static lighting level scale is 0. Let's say 0.25, your indirect lighting quality is going to be 4. So it should be a multiple. When you multiply it, it should be always 1. So if you keep it at 0.1, this has to be 10. So you understand, like it's always a multiple. Let's go with 4. And your indirect lighting smoothness, so the higher it is, the smoother your lighting is. So I'd say you have smooth lighting, but you lose detail kind of. So I usually tend to keep it at 1.2. And if you want to have more diffuse, you can up this up, and your environment intensity. So you can always change these values. And one thing you want to do is use ambient occlusion so you have proper shading going on. Like when I placed this here, it was slight, you see that, but it's not really ambient occlusion unless I build it. Let's build it once again with ambient occlusion turned on and see what actually happens. Yeah. So you can see right there, there's shadows. That's kind of ambient occlusion there. There's like shadowing at the corners, like over there. That's nothing but ambient occlusion. And you can also change those values over here. So you can always, increase, and it tells you right here. So this is how much AO you want to apply. So you can always increase this to like 3 or 4 if you want like darker shadows, or more ambient occlusion. And then you have your occlusion exponent, and this is the contrast. You can increase that. And this maximum is 1, so you can change it. And your occlusion distance is at what distance do you want occlusion to happen? Do you want it like a lot, or do you want it less? So that value you can change over here. So if you have all this big lighting and you want to get rid of all of it and start fresh, what you can do is you can click on this, build it, and it'll remove all the pre-computed baked lighting that was there. And then you just stop that and build it again, and it'll build it fresh. Yep. So you got that. And oh yeah, to get rid of these volume spheres, what you can do is tilt again, go up, change this to 0, and now they're gone. So you can't see it anymore. So the shadows. Main thing we need to understand. Our shadows are going to be bad if our light map is bad. And to fix light maps, we need to first go into light map density. And you can see, the thing you must know is, in light maps, blue means the light map resolution is too low. So how do we change that? How do we make our light maps resolution higher? So we're going to go into lighting. We're going to say override light map resolution, and we're going to change it. And it always has to be multiples of 2. So 2 to the power of, like, 64 into 2 is what? 128, right? It's still not right. Like, it's still, like, this is perfect. But if I, stretch it out more, what happened now? It's back to blue again. So I would increase it again, and I would say 256. Now what happened? It's still blue. It's not green yet. So I would increase it again, and I'd say 512. Now let's see. Now it's perfect. It's green. And the reason why this has no color, it's like brown, is because it's stationary. And stationary does not bake lighting. It's going to have based on your light maps. So that's why it doesn't have a light map on it. And I'll show you what happens if it's, oh no, where did it go? Tiny, tiny. Huh. It's not turning the color I wanted it to turn. Which is fine. It's fine. Let's change this. Okay. Yeah. So now you can see that there's red. And red means the light map resolution is too big for the amount that it is. So if it's red, it's not going to cause problem for the shadows and stuff, but it's going to cause a problem when you're building and baking the lighting, because it's just going to, it's too, what do you call it? It's taking up too much space. The resolution is too much. So the computer is telling you to, turn it down, or you're just going to have more build times, more, it's going to have more memory. It's going to have to store it in a higher resolution, and that's going to cause more, memory size. So you don't want that. So you're going to put it down. 32. What is 32? 32 is pretty fine. So you're going to have to, keep all of this stuff in mind when you're baking lighting, because it's the most important thing. Now let's keep this static. Keep this guy static, and let's build our lighting. Okay, so our light has been built. As you can see, we have perfect shadows happening. And both of them are static, baked shadows. And you want to always have stuff that's, large, not moving. It's not repeating too much. You want to have all of those static. But if you have small things like flowers, grass, stones, etc., keep it stationary. Stuff that's repeating a lot has too much geometry that you don't want to keep calculating the light maps for it. Keep it stationary, sorry. Now you can see again, the shadows are gone. Once it was baked, it was perfect shadows, and then the real-time shadows are a little bumpy. Another thing to keep in mind about lighting would be, I've told about the sphere, the reflection captures, which are sphere reflection captures. So these kind of just take a 360 image of the surrounding area and reflect it onto any reflectable surface. So if you have a metal or something, it's just gonna reflect onto it. So let's go back. Let's go to our content. So this was actually, the subway train is available free on Epic stores, and it's just a project you can open, and it already has all the lighting done. So you can go in and change the lighting and understand how it's happening, change the different colors, etc., and make your own. You don't have to put any items. All the materials are PBR ready, and you can just change stuff. So I'll go with filters, materials and textures. So like a metal. There's some metal dull. Cool. Okay, nah, that's too dull. Hmm. Okay. Just searching for something that shines. Okay, let's build everything and see what happens. can see that when you look at this, there's like kind of reflection. You can see a kind of box in it. It's very little, like very, very dull. This is so fast. There we go. You can see like the horizon. All of that's happening because of your sphere capture. Like it's reflecting onto this what it sees. Yeah. And so I'll talk about the different types of lights. So you have, let's just type light here, and what do you get? So a point light. A point light has a single source of light. Sorry, a point light has 8 different points of light. If it's static, it's fine. It's just gonna bake the light. But if it's stationary and movable, it's 8 times as performance heavy as a spotlight because it has 8 points from which light is being calculated. It's kind of heavy on your system, so you have to use it sparingly. And you can change the source radius. Oh, yep, you can change soft source radius to the source length. So if you have like, you know, a tube light or something, you can widen this and then widen that. I'm sorry, you can do this so it kind of becomes like a tube light. And yeah, your attenuation radius, you can increase it. So remember, the bigger it is, the more performance heavy it's going to become. So you have to be careful with placing lights which are stationary. And if you do place a light and you don't want it to be too cost heavy, you can always remove cast shadows, so it doesn't cast any shadows. Another useful tip is that if you have a light and you don't want it to impact another object in your scene and only want it to like make one object brighter, so let's make this light, you know, let's go with like purple. And I only want the purple light to hit this, and I don't want it to hit anything else. So what I'm going to go is I'm going to make it channel 0. I'm going to go to the plane and go to channels, and I'm going to set it to channel 1. So you can see that the light only hits the plane and it does not hit this or anything else. So that's basically what it does. Another thing. What other thing? Right. So spotlight. A spotlight has 1 point, and it is the, you know, least performance heavy light in your system. It only has 1 point from which the rays are coming out. It's useful to use spotlights. The, you know, where is it? Okay, yeah. So your attenuation radius, the shorter it is, you know, the more you increase these two values, performance is obviously going to increase if the light is stationary or movable. But one thing to note is that let's make this, let's delete this light for now. Let's go here and let's make this light. If you have a, let's go with this. Let's go with blue. Let's reduce our directional light. We want it to be 1, super dark. Let's go with, yeah, 1 is fine. So now I push this light up and I keep pushing it up. Oh no, it's so big. Let's reduce this size. Okay. So one thing to note is the further away your spotlight is, the softer the light is when it's falling down. So let's increase it. So the light's going to be softer. It's going to give you a softer type of lighting. But if it's closer, it's going to give you harder. As you can see, the light is way, way, way harder over here now. Yeah, so if the spotlight is further away, it'll give you softer shadows. So if you want softer shadows, you go with a further away spotlight. Rect light. A rectangle light is the most performance heavy light in Unreal Engine if it's stationary or movable. And we do have something called the box reflection capture, and this is super cheap. It just takes a box image and reflects it you can use this instead of a sphere reflection, and only uses 8 vertices. Um, so one thing you need to keep in mind is never decrease the specular value of any material, but always change the metallic or roughness. Like change any of those, but never change the specular. Whatever the engine has it, just keep it as that. So what I explained to you right now is is just global illumination with baked lighting. Um, so you just need to make sure your light maps are correct, the movability of all your objects. Make sure you have, your skylight, your atmosphere, or you could use a sky sphere or anything, it doesn't matter. Make sure you have your sphere captures. Make sure all of your materials are PBR correct. And, with that, you should be good to go.